Welcome to another episode of Come Together. One, we're live with Brian Townsend. Welcome, Brian. I'm so happy that you're joining us today. Thank you so much, man.
Yeah, no, thank you. I look forward to it.
So, federal and state officer, over 30 years of experience. Does that feel like a snap of a finger to you? What does that feel like?
Oh my goodness, right? I feel like I started yesterday, and where did life go? I've just been so blessed.
I'm I want to start with are you once you like see the hot dog factory with working with the feds and the federal government / state government, are you more inclined to trust it or less inclined, do you think?
Uh,
Not to be, you could answer however you want, I'm
well,
not trying to
what's
put you in the
interesting is when you see how the sausage is made, you get a sense of all the things that it's not, right? All the conspiracy theories, all the
hmm
I mean, it's people. It's not some system, right? It's just people who make hopefully good choices, sometimes bad choices, and so, I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of really good people who are amazing and who have, good hearts and good intentions, but sometimes there's not. So,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I'm more trusting, and I think that's my, my who I am, right? I'm more of an optimistic, trusting person. Like, I want to see the good in people, and I want to see the good in the world.
Right. Definitely. I mean, I agree too. I was just curious, because I was like, from someone standing on the outside and talking to someone that's on the inside, I was always curious.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because you hear all these things and see all these things, and then when you're in the system working, with the things that you hear about on the news or just, through friends or family, you're like, that's not really accurate.
Right.
You know,
I was kind of hoping to hear that, by the way, because I think that soothes some of my anxiety. I've been actively working on being a Twitter addict or an ex addict for a little while now, and I think it's just way unhealthy for my health, and and I just see so much speculation that's like
yeah,
that. I'm like, this is too fantastical, and like, you
yeah.
know,
Do-
but it's just hard to tell nowadays, what's reality and what's not, and what people are, what's a legitimate conspiracy and what's, kind of just a little crazy. But, I'm excited to get a little bit of relief, honestly. That's kind of what I'm hoping for. But, so you started your career as a local law enforcement, right? State.
I did. I grew up in Northern Virginia, or outside of DC, and I left that area to go to the Midwest to Joplin, Missouri, of all places, right in the middle of the country, to go to college. And I loved the area. And when I was working on my graduate degree, I started my career in law enforcement as a police officer in Joplin.
hmm
And originally I had no intention of being a police officer, nothing against it. I ended up being probably the best decision I made at that point in my life. And I had some other opportunities, but that one was the most promising, and it worked out really well because ultimately my goal was the DEA, the Drug Enforcement
That
Administration.
was your goal.
Yeah, it was my goal. I was the entire time, and I didn't know how I was going to accomplish it, quite frankly, but
Yeah.
it was absolutely my goal. So being a police officer was a great experience. First, we had a great department, great city. Just the people were wonderful and very supportive of what we did, and the police department itself. So yeah, it was great. It was 5 years. It was short. It was over in a snap of a finger, right?
How long was training for become a police officer?
So to be a police officer, you typically have to go through some type of police academy. So at that time, we had a regional police academy at the college, and that's pretty common in the state of Missouri. There's a lot of regional police academies, and they're usually in criminal justice departments at colleges and universities. And I don't remember how long it was exactly. I want to say probably 3-4 months.
hmm
Uh, you know,
Wow.
you, and I had, of course, I had my degree, but that wasn't a requirement. That was just kind of an added. It was kind of a
Yeah.
plus.
What was your degree in?
Uh, I had an associate degree in law enforcement. My bachelor's degree was in criminal justice administration.
Nice.
My master's degree, and this is where everyone laughs, is in human resource development, with an emphasis in training, which was exactly what I had
Yeah,
also.
which we'll get to, which you've done,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
Yeah, awesome, awesome, awesome. So you really you went each step of the way with
I did.
with
I
degree.
somehow planned it out very well at a young age, and probably, frankly, accidentally.
Uh-huh. Definitely, definitely. How'd you decide to get the human resources master's degree? What was that? What was the decision making process like there?
Well, I wanted to stay in the area in Missouri Southern, where I went to for my undergrad. At the time, didn't have any graduate degrees, and I really liked that school a lot. But nearby, Pittsburgh State University, which is in Pittsburgh, Kansas, maybe 45 minutes away,
Yeah.
they offered graduate programs, and I didn't want an MBA, and I didn't want anything. I looked at the human resources. I had an advisor at Missouri Southern that was just a great guy. His name was Terry, and he recommended it. I looked at the program and I thought, wow, there's an emphasis in training here. And I've always had this interest in teaching.
Hmm.
And I thought, well, this might be a good fit. And I didn't realize at the time that it was a perfect fit because, like you said, we'll get into later, it was something that I would ultimately, get
Yeah,
involved with.
go down that path. Yeah, yeah, really cool, really cool. Um, I ask you now. I guess we'll get into a little later. The administrative part of teaching as opposed to the classroom part of teaching. What do you prefer? Because I'm a teacher myself, and I'm a little afraid. I love being in the classroom. I'm a little afraid to get into the administrative part of it. You know?
Yeah, I know. I prefer hands-on. I prefer to be, in the classroom and the interaction. Even more so, like I know a lot of folks are doing the remote online teaching, and I'm not, against it. I truly prefer being face to face with people. I think that's where you really build, beautiful connections and relationships. Yeah, the administrative part's important, obviously, and I have no ill will to anyone who wants to go into those to take that path. Uh, for me, though, I like just to be I like to be a worker. I like to be on
Yeah.
the ground. It's just even when I was at DEA, I went into management. I missed being a worker, and not that you can't work, and not that you can't make a difference in management or administration, but
It's a different
ultimately
type of responsibility, different type of
it,
role.
it is right. It really is, and it's something, if someone's listening thinking, oh, I want to take that next step, you better think about it because it's gonna be a lot different than what you're doing now.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So you always wanted to be DEA. Was that because you wanted to fight bad guys? Is that because you had family that was in it? Is that because like, what was it? What was the motivation or inspiration?
I actually saw what drugs were doing to people at an early age, and
Okay.
it bothered me. It really did. It bothered me
Yeah.
to the core where I thought, why are these people poisoning themselves? Why are they hurting themselves, hurting their families, hurting communities?
Hmm.
And I just made a decision that this was something that I wanted to be part of the solution, and drug enforcement was it. And I didn't really know what the DEA was until about high school. And plus law enforcement, let's face it, when you're young and you're looking at people driving fast cars and
Hmm.
carrying guns, I mean,
Sure.
there's an appeal to that as well. But ultimately, deep down, it was the fact that, what can I do to serve my community and help people who are struggling with addiction or, you know,
Right. Right. So what are some? So you went from school, grad school, police academy, 5 years police work, and thank you for your service. Thank you for all your service.
thanks.
Um, Is that a typical route for a DEA agent? What is it? What do people that you're with? How do they end up there?
A lot of DEA agents don't have that type of background. At the time when I got hired in the late '90s, we had a pretty good mix of prior law enforcement and prior military. I mean,
Okay.
that was pretty consistent, and I think that still is. You still have a lot of police officers who want to work as federal investigators, and a lot of military folks as well interested in this career path. But I mean, I'm telling you, we've had. I worked. I worked with engineers. I worked with an engineer who used to work on fighter planes, F-15s and things, and he just
No way. For
changed.
what?
Yeah, he just had a change of heart. He wanted to be a DEA special agent. I worked with teachers. I've worked with folks who worked retail their entire career. It's really not your background. It's more about just how that made your DNA, right? How that made you who you are today. Did you show up to work? Did you have good relationships?
Mhm.
Did you ever get fired? I mean, what do your coworkers, what do your bosses think about you? It's just what makes you who you are, and how
Right.
did you handle yourself in any type of career situation? And I think that's more important than what you did, because what you did or what you do now can be trained. It's kind of who you are that we're very interested in.
Wow. And so that goes into the consideration. It goes into consideration for the hiring process. So, like, I got a creative writing and literature degree in college, which is
Nice.
practically useless, right?
Oh,
As in, I mean, I love it, but for the purpose of a job, for the purpose of job hunting, I got very lucky that my dad is a small business owner. That I had a family business that I could join, and I had something to fall back on. And I still work with him to today. We're very close, although we have to live in a different state to get along, but it's okay. And but we talk on the phone 100 times a day, and we're always communicating. But one of the things that I noticed, and actually I had to figure this out when I was in college, I was going around trying to find jobs or internships, and and everyone would look at my resume and kind of laugh when they saw the creative writing, major degree. And so I got one of the business school's portfolio covers. So I was walking around with the business school portfolio, and they'd look through my resume, and I had a couple of internships where I did some business. Then they look at my degree, and they're like, wait a minute. You went to business school? I'm like, I don't know, but I just I got this, and I thought it'll help me get my foot in the door. But if you're telling me that the DEA would hire just based on any background, that's really cool. That gives people a lot of opportunity.
yeah, absolutely. And I actually like your degree because to me, you're using your brain. You writing is not easy, and I
Hmm.
love that. If I were in the hiring, if I were someone who was hiring for DEA and you were in the hiring process, I would certainly look at that.
Oh yeah.
Because I'm thinking, someone that can critical think, someone that can, bridge decisions, think outside the box, and ultimately put those thoughts in onto paper and describe situations and things like that. And I think that's important, especially in law enforcement. People don't think about how much writing happens in law enforcement. I
Oh
certainly
yeah.
do, and I can tell you early on in my career, I was probably a horrific writer, really. Thankfully, I had a supervisor who was an English major,
Wow. There
and
you
he
go.
would, I mean, he would basically take the red pen to my early reports at DEA, and I didn't wasn't offended by it. He made me a better writer, and I'm thankful for it.
That's awesome. Yeah, yeah. One of the things I was thinking about the value of it is I teach English now in a high school, and and I struggle a lot with what am I trying to teach? Especially with ChatGPT and AI, and 5 paragraph essays are going to be
Yeah,
essentially useless. In a couple, by the time these 10th graders are in college in 3 years. And so one of my main values is self-expression, learning how to articulate what AI is not going to be able to do that for you. You can't explain what's in here and what's in here, with AI, but you can do it by practicing, communication, and then comprehension is AI could give you all the information that you need, but if you can't understand it or apply it in a creative way in your own life, then what's the point really? So I think that it's a skill set that we all need, and then you could kind of just apply it to anywhere that you go. I hope at least.
I agree. I absolutely agree, and I hope you can multiple. I hope folks that are in your classes multiply your efforts because that's exactly what young people need. 100% what young people need. Because if not, AI is going to take over the writing. It's going to take over the critical thinking and decision making, and that's
Sure.
going to be a disservice to them and really to humanity.
Yeah, definitely. It's actually funny that you say that because my friend sent me uh, a 2.5 minute voice note the other day, and it was music. And I was listening to it. I'm like, this is fine. It's cool. I like, what is this? He's like, oh, I'm in the gym, and I asked AI to come up with a song with basic inspirational lyrics and just upbeat tone, and I could play it, and while I'm working out. And on one hand, I was a little blown away, and on the other hand, I was like, "Thank God I didn't like this," because because it did feel a little cold. It did feel like it was missing something. And today I was on a jog and I was listening to a live Springsteen, performance while I'm jogging, and I'm like, there is nothing like a live performance where you like hear like the magic of the human relationship, between the musician and the crowd, and the musician, his instruments, and his band. And I'm like. You can't. I don't know how you're going to be able to. I mean, maybe they will one day, but I don't know how that's going to happen. There's something too incredible about consciousness and sharing. That's just human.
I absolutely agree. It's such an important part of us growing and learning and just relationships in general. So
Yeah. So, what's the difference? I guess you could tell me based on your experience, the difference in people's response when you're local law enforcement as opposed to federal law enforcement. What's reputationally, or even for yourself, even within your, I mean, you left the police force to join the feds. Was that considered like a common thing or an uncommon thing, or what did people respond to that like?
People were very happy for me. They were very supportive. The bad guys don't like the feds because really it comes down to punishment, and more so now because a lot of very progressive prosecutors kind of moved into large cities, and I know there's been push to move them out, thankfully, but they stopped prosecuting crime. And
Hmm.
so when you have someone who's, let's say if someone's been arrested and they're cooperating, there's no consequences so why would they cooperate? I
Yeah,
mean, you're not looking at any time at all, or maybe 1 or 2 days. So when they were like, well, okay, that's great, but we're going to bring the federal agents in now because this is going to be a federal investigation. We're going to be working with the U.S. Attorney's Office. The the pucker factor increases a little bit.
that's good. That's good. That's good.
Which
That's
is
good.
great. Yeah, absolutely. And I know state and local officers who actually use that to their advantage. When they're interviewing these folks, they're like, "Hey, that's okay. That's great. If you don't want to cooperate, but this is gonna go to the DEA or the FBI, and
Yeah.
he's gonna."
Do people do pe- do is it like the shows or movies where people are territorial about their crime scenes or their, whatever they're working on?
Unfortunately, I have seen that way too much in my career, and I hate that. Uh, I am someone who absolutely believes in deconfliction and
Hmm.
collaborating with other folks. I don't care who you work for,
Yeah.
what your position is. If the goal is to put someone in jail or hold someone accountable for what they did, then
Hmm.
that's the goal.
Yeah.
I can remember an investigation we worked years and years ago, and this department was just absolutely undermining what we were doing. And these were absolutely dangerous people. I mean, we knew they committed multiple murders, witness intimidation. So law enforcement couldn't really do anything because the cases would just fall apart. Not because of the
Hmm.
law enforcement, because the
Yeah.
witnesses were so scared. And we had a really good investigation. I'm doing some Title III investigation, which is basically listening to telephones, right?
Hmm.
And I mean, we had this group dead to rights, but then this person in this department was actively undermining our efforts. And I remember I sat down with their command staff, and I said, look, I said, this is ridiculous. I said, we have a goal here. We have some bad people here. And it wasn't just one or two people. I mean, this was an organization, and this was an organization worthy of our attention and worthy of being accountable for the horrific things they were doing.
Yeah.
And I said, at the end of this investigation, if you want to get in front of the camera and tell everyone that this is your police department's case and leave us out, I don't care. I
Yeah.
really don't care.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we need to work together to put these people in jail or give the prosecutors the best, evidence and best case we can to put them in jail. And that's my motive. 100% period. End of sentence. That's it. And so it infuriates me when I see people who hold the cards too close to the chest and don't share, because it really does at the end of the day hurt our communities when people do that. And so yeah, I talk about that quite a bit when we do law enforcement specific training. Hey,
Yeah.
look, we got to deconflict. We got to, there might be someone out there who, guess what, has a better investigation than you. You
Do
know,
you think it's ego? You think it's wanting, or do you think it's career building? Like, I mean, I feel like it kind of goes to both, I mean, or, you know, and like you said, maybe publicity, I don't know.
yeah. Absolutely both. I've seen people who are just mad. I don't like DEA. I don't like FBI, so therefore I'm not going to share, which is silly.
Hmm.
And then when you dive deep and down, it's usually someone who applied and didn't get hired or something like
Oh,
that. And I
man.
think this is ridiculous. Like, grow up. This is an important position. What you're doing. This isn't middle school. Your best friend asked the girl you like to go skate with, right? I mean, this is
Yes.
silly. I've seen some ego driven as well. I've seen some folks who, we call it the blue rocket flame in their rear end, and they're trying to get up into the organization as high and as fast as they can, and
Uh-huh.
they'll step on people to do that, and not everyone, obviously, but so I've seen a little bit both, and it's frustrating. And I actually had someone tell me once that it probably hurt me in my career that I wasn't more self-absorbed and more taking credit for these things. And I've never I never let that bother me. I've never felt like I needed to change who I am. I didn't want to compromise my morals, my principles.
Definitely.
And ultimately, I've always felt like if I could support my, like, especially when I was in management, if I could support my team and give them the resources they need to be successful, then ultimately I'm going to look successful, right? And it's
Sure.
not for me. It's not, it's for the good of what we're doing. I really believe in mission and team, and I try to live my life that way.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's beautiful, and I think we need people like that. I feel similarly. That I people tell I talk to I talk to customers. I sell medical equipment, right? And I talk to customers, and a lot of times I'll be like, listen, I'm going to give you some information or some advice. I'm going to make less money from it, but my goal is like money is not just the end goal. Like I need to support my family. I need to put food on the table. I need to pay my mortgage, and obviously waves of how easy or not it is to do. But at the end of the day, like I have what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm trying to raise a family. I'm trying to teach. I'm trying to put some positivity into the world. And I only and money is just a means to an end to accomplish that. And everything else is just a means to an end, which is like what you're saying. Ultimately make the world a better place. Get more drugs off the street. Get people hold people accountable for their behavior. Um, what kind of drugs were you focusing on throughout your career? Is it things like marijuana, or is it more like heavy drugs, so like fentanyl, coke, heroin, whatever it was? Are you allowed to
So
talk about
early on
that?
in my career, it was marijuana, cocaine, and methamphetamine. Those were the big three. And
Okay.
then ultimately, I would start seeing heroin. We all started seeing heroin probably in the 2010s.
Mm-hmm.
Then that would turn into fentanyl. So at the end of my career, it was pretty much all fentanyl with a few cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin cases sprinkled in. But yeah, that those are the cocaine, methamphetamine, fentanyl, heroin are the big four. I say.
Yeah, and they're so dangerous. I kind of hear. I know people talk about coke. And coke has kind of become like culturally almost like it's been culturally acceptable since comedians in the 60s and 70s and everyone and all these actors and Wall Street and bankers, and it's kind of glorified and like everywhere, and it's terrible. It scares the crap out of me.
Well, yeah, me as well. All the drugs scared. I'll even tell you why I don't like marijuana if you want to know. But
Sure,
yeah,
sure.
absolutely. And fentanyl has been the game changer. I spent 28 years active in law enforcement. Badge and gun. I'm
Hmm.
still working with law enforcement well, actually every day, not almost every day, in a training capacity. So, 30 plus years working with law enforcement, and I've
Hmm.
never seen a drug more impactful. I've never seen a drug change the drug landscape like fentanyl has. I mean, recreational drug use, casual drug use, drug experimentation. I mean, we now have a drug in our drug supply that can kill you the first time you use it. We've never had that. When you and I were younger, if someone died of a first time drug use from meth or coke, pretty rare. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but
Sure.
pretty rare. I mean, they pretty much had to been,
Mhm.
trying to consume an entire pound or something. But, only, fentanyl, it only takes only 2 milligrams to kill you.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
only 2 milligrams is a couple granules of salt or sand. So you're talking literally just a speck.
yeah.
Once it gets into what you think you're taking, like let's say even pills, right? You think you're taking an Adderall or a
Hmm.
perk or an oxy, a couple granules of fentanyl and you're dead.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right away, and it's been such an issue. I think that so I just read a book called American Cartel about the day about I'm sure you're familiar with it, right? Based on
I
your
am. I,
smile.
I haven't read it yet, but I am. I actually have a copy of it at home. Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah. So I have a copy of it here. Actually, the book was published before the case was actually finished. I had to Google what happened at the end. But what's your take or understanding on this opioid crisis that's been, happening like absolutely sweeping the country for the last 20 years?
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I have a
Hmm.
nonprofit organization that I run called Only 2MG, and that's the biggest reason why I started this nonprofit was to address the opioid crisis, address the
Yeah.
illicit fentanyl crisis. And like I said, we now have a drug in our drug supply that's changed everything. I mean, game changer is exactly how I would describe it.
Hmm.
And that's why I'll say it again. That's why after 30 years in law enforcement, I've never seen a drug more impactful. I mean, it's just had a profound impact. It's in everything. And to give you some perspective, In 2000, so the DEA runs a program called the National Forensic Laboratory Information System, NFLIS-drug. And we work with about 98, 99% of all the labs out there. So I don't
Hmm.
care if you're state police, I don't care if you're a county, I don't care if you're a police department, wherever you are in the United States, if you send your drugs into a crime lab, there's a good chance that's going to go into this NFLIS drug. And that's how DEA looks for drug trends and things like that. So
Right.
let me give you some perspective of what fentanyl's done. In 2014, there were about 5,500 instances of fentanyl being seized by all of law enforcement in the United States. Again, federal, state, and local. Okay,
Yeah.
5,500. By 2019, there were over 100,000.
Oh my
By
goodness.
2020, there were over 200,000. These are just seized by law enforcement. So from, again, 2014, 5,500 to 2020, over 200,000. That's a more than 3,500% increase in just 6
Yeah.
short years. So
That's
now when you
fentanyl.
look at just fentanyl.
It's just
So then,
fentanyl.
yeah. And if you look at the number one drug seized in the United States is methamphetamine. And that's historically been number one for a long time now.
Hmm.
Number two has been historically cocaine. Well, now, in a very short amount of time, fentanyl is now the second most seized drug in the United States. And then if you break the states up separately, I think it's 16 or I think it's 16 states now. The number one drug seized is now fentanyl, no longer methamphetamine. And again, go back to 2014 when there were only 5,500
Yeah.
exhibits in all of law enforcement. I mean, that's how quick it took over. So I mean, it came in our drug supply through because of the legal opioids, and especially in the mid 1990s. With an increased heroin use, and then it, got into our heroin, and then from there it got into our pills, and then from there it got into our cocaine, and then from there it got into our methamphetamine, and it's saturated our drug supply. So yeah, so the opioid crisis is it's devastating. It's impactful, and you look at the number of people dying. When
Yeah.
I was in school, or when I was a police officer in early, in the '90s, we lost 2,000-3,000 people a year. And I'm not minimizing folks, but that's a pretty low number when you in comparison to today's numbers.
Hmm.
2024 data is not complete yet, but 2023 data is like 107,000 people lost their lives. I
Yeah.
think that when I started my law enforcement career, 4,000 people lost, 2,000 or 3,000 people lost their lives to drugs. Now we're at 100,000 plus. And then when you dive deeper into those numbers, 2/3, 75% lost their lives from one drug, fentanyl.
No way.
Yeah. And those people weren't even, I guarantee you 99.9% of those people weren't even looking for fentanyl. They were
For sure, right?
looking for pills, right? They were looking for coke. They were looking for
Yeah.
meth. And like I
Yeah.
said, it found its way into our drug supply, and it just saturated everything. And now you have people who think they're taking a Xanax bar. They think they're taking an Adderall or an Oxy, or they think they're just snorting a line of coke, on a Friday night, and boom, they're hit with fentanyl, and that is driving the numbers significant increase.
It's heartbreaking. I have a guy, I have a friend of mine who I did an episode with a little while back, and he never, he drank every now and then, smoked cigarettes, and he's from Savannah, Georgia, so he used to play a lot of golf, and he tore his meniscus, and he went to the doctor. The doctor said, "Hey man, I can't do surgery for a month. Here's a couple, here's a prescription for some painkillers."
Yeah.
Um, and he said, "Come back to me in a month, and we'll do surgery." Came back in a month. Took it every six, one pill every 6 hours, whatever the doctor said. Came back after a month, did the surgery. The guy had another 2 weeks of pills, and he came, and for the recovery, and he started getting withdrawal symptoms. And he goes back to the doctor. The doctor says, "Oh, you got to go to rehab. You're a drug addict." And he's like, "I'm a what?" He's like, "I'm an Orthodox Jew. I got wife and kids. I got, I have I have a business. I have a life I have to maintain. I can't just go to rehab. What are you talking about? Like, I have a whole life." And it took him years to kick it. It took him years to kick it. And actually, he said the only thing that worked, therapy and rehab and whatever, he said the only thing that worked was he went down to Mexico and did Ibogaine one time. And he said
Oh, that's
since then he has not taken a Motrin, he hasn't taken an aspirin, he has not touched an opioid. He says since it's been like I think maybe 5 or 6 years, and just completely clean.
I'm happy to hear that. Well, I'm happy to hear the back end of that story. Obviously, not the
Yeah.
front end. That's I've heard these similar stories all the time, and unfortunately, a lot of them turn for the worse. Where they went to the doctor, got this prescription, and then because of the substance use disorder, because of the addiction, they started using more and more and more, or they turned to heroin and other
Yeah, and I was
things.
going to say, so at a certain point, he was like, at one point, he goes, I'm ashamed of it. He goes, and everyone, he goes, every addict does this. He goes, I was hiding it from my wife and my family. And he goes, and he goes, thank God I didn't get to the point where I was looking for street drugs, where I wasn't looking for any kind of, pill off the, whatever it is off the street,
Yeah,
but
that
I mean, who knows what would have happened?
No, absolutely, it happens a lot. And now let me give you another story. Now, let's just say that it wasn't because of an injury and because of a prescription. Let's just say it was because of some type of abuse in life,
Yeah.
physical or sexual or
Mm-hmm.
emotional abuse, and you turn to drugs or alcohol as a coping mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
That happens a lot as well. We know that happens a
Sure.
lot with people. There's tons of reasons why people use drugs, but so now you're struggling with not only the drug use, but you're struggling with something that you're trying to escape. So it's a double whammy, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's real for a lot of people, and this is
You're
the
trading,
story.
you're trading one devil for another, unfortunately.
Absolutely, and until you fix both,
Yeah,
it's an uphill
yeah, and
battle
it
for
takes a
sure.
lot of work. It takes an enormous amount of. It takes a lot of work even if you're healthy. It takes a lot of work to just be a regular person. I mean,
Yeah,
life
yeah,
isn't easy.
yeah.
Um, I wanted to ask. I saw on your site that you were between Little Rock, Springfield, and Corpus Christi, Texas.
That's correct.
And I want to ask about those places, but one of the things
Okay.
I wanted to ask about geographically, actually, and what I was curious about, Corpus Christi, I could kind of see being a big, just based on the map. It's on, it's by it's by the ocean, it's by the border of Mexico. It's probably DEA heaven over there, I imagine. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Most of our work in Corpus, we had a pretty large, what we call area of responsibility, AOR.
mhm.
I think we had 17 counties. So we went. I don't know how well you know Texas, but we went west almost to San Antonio, not San
Yeah,
Antonio, but just to the east side of San Antonio, and then
mhm.
we went north just south of Houston and Victoria, and
Sure.
then we went south very close to like Brownsville and McAllen. So we had a
Gotcha.
pretty darn
It's
large
huge.
area.
Yeah.
It is, and there's two highways that go through South Texas, right in just literally from Mexico right up. It's 77 and 281, and you come into the country through legal port of entries, POEs, and then you have to go through checkpoints, and those checkpoints are very, very, very busy. And anytime the Border Patrol seizes drugs from the checkpoints, the DEA responds, and we're the investigative body on those drugs. So even though
So
our
you're
office,
not actually confiscating yourself. There's border patrol, and the border patrol calls you once they've found something.
yeah, so they stop a vehicle. Let's say it has, I don't know, 1,000 pounds of cocaine in it. So they'll apprehend the suspect or suspects, and then the vehicle and the drugs themselves, and then we'll respond. We'll actually take custody of everything,
Hmm.
the suspect, the drugs. We'll process that, and then we'll work the investigation. So even though our office was geographically in Corpus Christi, most of our time was spent down further in South Texas along the border. So
I
primarily
imagine. Right.
in the McAllen area. Most of our investigations led to the McAllen area or Mexico. So
Yeah,
we were
yeah. I
working.
do a lot of business actually in McAllen. A lot of Mexican customers come to the States to buy ultrasound equipment.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very funny.
What'd you think? The first time I ever went down there, I had this. There's going to be cactuses, and it was going to be some Wild West town, right? And I go down there, and McAllen is a large area, like
I actually
tons of
haven't I
homes,
haven't been
tons
there
of
myself. It's
restaurants.
funny. I haven't been to
Yeah.
McAllen. I've been to San Antonio, Austin, Houston, Beaumont. I've been to one or two other places, but I haven't been to McAllen yet. Um, I want to
Believe it
go.
or not, it's actually. I mean, I prefer all the other places you told me that you've been to before I go to McAllen, but McAllen's not some little tiny, hillbilly town. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's it's pretty built up, pretty good. I mean, you're not going to go without food, shopping. there's everything down there. It's a nice little area, and the people are wonderful too, and on both sides of the border for that
Yeah,
matter. But
definitely, definitely. I found that for sure. But so I understand how Corpus Christi and the whole like South Texas area is big for DEA, geographically especially, right? Like if you're planning to smuggle drugs or to sell or to distribute, I'm sure that's one of the main places to go. Little Rock and Springfield are far more inland and have a lot less, which seem to be a lot less geographical access. I feel like, no?
no, the highway systems. My first assignment was Little Rock, so I spent about 10 years in Little Rock,
How did you like
and
it there?
I actually loved it. The funny thing about that, I was in Missouri, in Joplin, Missouri. If you look at the maps, not too far away from Arkansas.
Mhm.
And I'm telling you, I avoided Arkansas like it was the plague. I just thought, oh no, there are a bunch of, rednecks down there and no way, right? And when I
Mhm.
had an opportunity to go to Little Rock, I'm like, it's only 4 hours away from Joplin and had a lot of friends there. I'd started building a pretty big footprint there and I looked into it and I thought this looks like and no one in my academy class had any interest at all going to Arkansas because it was the same thing. It was the stereotypes, and let me tell you, first of all, what a amazing place that was. The whole entire state. I mean, Arkansas is really a little gem that people laugh at, but the quality of life is pretty darn good.
I bet.
Little Rock's got some issues with crime and things like that, but I could make that argument in a lot of
Yeah.
cities. But as far as the drug work, as far as being a DEA special agent there, our highway system was very unique. We had a highway that cut in through Texarkana, which is on the bottom left of the state from Texas,
Hmm.
and then we also had Highway 30 and Highway 40, yeah, and so we had one that just kind of cut right across the state. And I mean, we could have cases that tied back to Arizona or California. We'd have cases that tied into Texas, and the cartels operate in certain areas of Mexico. So it was pretty cool in the sense that we were working a lot of different type of investigations. We weren't just, it wasn't just like when in South Texas where I was in Corpus and along the border, it was primarily the Gulf Cartel and the Los Zetas. And I'm not complaining. It was a huge eye-opening learning experience for me. But in Arkansas, because of the highway system, the traffickers that were coming through, I mean, we were working investigations that were completely different from each other, which was pretty
Right.
cool.
So where are people coming from?
Uh, Again, Arizona, New Mexico, California, Texas,
And
and
then
these were
they're on their way to distribute to other
they're on their
places, and
way
you
to
catch
St.
them
Louis.
in
They're
the
on their way
middle.
to Chicago. Yeah, they're on their way to New York. They're on
Wow.
their way to, Chicago, Detroit, all these major cities. So, if sometimes we do controlled deliveries on these seizures, sometimes we would just have investigations that we would link, from the source to the destination, and that would mean we would travel to, Miami, we would travel to New York, we'd travel to, Chicago, these big cities where the drugs were going. So, and then just locally, I mean, we had a lot of what we call local or regional impact investigations. So this is when we're just, buying dope and, maybe working undercover and quite, I mean, it was great. It was a great experience. It was a lot more than I thought it was going to be, which
You
was
usually spend a
wonderful.
decade there.
I did. I spent 10 years there. I was not in management. So at this point now I had about 15 years in law enforcement total, and I decided to go into management, and that's when I went to Texas.
I see. Okay. What's being a special agent like on the ground while you were there, as
Well,
opposed to management?
well, you have a lot of freedom. First of all, there's no uniform. You wear jeans to work, and
Cool.
you have a lot of freedom to. I mean, you're working in teams and you have bosses, but you really do have a lot of freedom to really push your investigations in the ways that you want to push them. It's
Do they present a case to you, or do they say, "Hey, go get out there and find what you could find"?
go out there and find them. And early on, I didn't. I was like, how the heck am I going to do that? Because I didn't have any relationships. I wasn't from the state. Didn't have
Yeah.
anybody there. So I got in my car and I drove to sheriff's offices and I drove to police departments and I'd introduce myself to whoever I could, whether it was the sheriff, whether it was the chief, whether it was just the sergeant on duty. I mean, and I shook hands and gave my business card and just tried to build relationships. And sometimes
Hmm.
people were skeptical, like who's this Fed coming in our building, right? And then sometimes people said, yeah, that's awesome. We do have a problem here. And it's nice that you're here. And I end up building some amazing relationships that way and working some incredible investigations because of these relationships.
Yeah.
So, but every so often you might have a supervisor or something happens and that comes, there's a file and someone supervisor puts it on your desk and says, hey, look into this.
Yeah.
That happens as well, but for the most part, you really do have a lot of freedom. And
Do you prefer the direction or do you prefer the freedom?
I prefer the freedom personally. I
Yeah.
love that. I love building those relationships. I think that's one of the most important thing that we can do. And I love collaborating and working with those agencies and using all of our resources to to better the investigation. So yeah,
Yeah.
I absolutely prefer that.
Yeah, it's cool. It's funny because I've found actually through teaching, it's really interesting that certain students of mine, I used to think that certain students are better or worse writers, and some of them are, of course, but some of them, it turns out, function better with like I'd be like, here's a creative prompt. It's raining on a Wednesday, go, and write for 10 minutes, go do it. And some students needed the directions. No, I just need some more structure and some more directions and format. And some people students are like, I can write anything I want. I'm like, anything you want, and they just take off with it. They just and the places they go are incredible and creative and fun. And I'm sure that applies to everything. There are certain people that are more like, hey, let me just go see what I can do, and give me a job, and I'll figure out my own way of doing it. And then there are people that like being told, okay, here's exactly what you're supposed to do over here, and then follow the step over there. So did you do what people do in like the shows? You go to bars, you or wherever, you examine like what's happening. Like, what do you do?
Well, your life changes when you do go when you're in public. Your back's always to the wall. You're always looking at potential threats, things like that. But as far as working or trying to initiate investigations, I mean, sometimes really it's just the relationships. So and so will call from a police department and say, hey, we just popped a guy with a pound of meth, and we think he might cooperate. Would you be interested in this? And absolutely. Even if he doesn't cooperate, let me come in and take a look. Let me see if I can, exploit the telephones and or communication devices, and and help you out and figure out where the dope's coming from, where it's going, and if there's any co-conspirators involved, and how we can put them all in jail.
Awesome. It's so cool. So it's almost like leads, almost like sales, like you got to get leads, and you got to get, you got to get customers that are going to call you and say, hey, I'm interested in this. And then you got to step up and close the deal, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, that's it's important. I know I'm talking about relationships a lot, but I think that's critical.
For
I think
sure.
it's critical in any profession for that matter.
Definitely.
And for me, that was really what helped me was, even though I liked the freedom, the freedom would start because of that phone call quite often, not all the time, but quite often.
Definitely. So then you get called after 10 years, hey, we want you to move to management, or how'd that go?
So within DEA, that's your option. I made a decision to go into management. I liked working cases, but I just made that decision, and there's a process. You have to take a test. You have to have some support from your current management. And I did that and had the support, and I got selected. And then you apply for positions, and I applied for a couple positions,
Hmm.
and got selected to go to Corpus Christi, and that was my first formal. I mean, I had been in an acting capacity, like when your boss is out and you're the boss, that
Yeah.
type of thing. But now I'm a supervisor, and now I'm in South Texas. I'm there for almost 7 years, and I have a very high performing, high functioning team, great men and women, and was very fortunate to.
I saw that none of your people got hurt in the line of duty. That no one under
Yeah,
your
that's
management
not
got
very.
hurt in the line of duty. That is incredible. That's
I'm
how do
something
you
I'm
do that?
very proud of. Yeah, I'm just something I'm proud of. And
It's got to be rare, no?
no, it's not as rare as probably it sounds. Um, I mean, it happens. We have a dangerous job, and
Yeah.
and people do get hurt. But I think something that we did really well was risk management. Operational planning. That's something that DEA does very, very well. And it's interesting. Maybe I'm going off on a tangent here, but I've had
Please
folks who
do.
say, I've had folks that say, I don't know if what I did at the DEA is marketable in the civilian world. I'm like, all right, first of all, think about what you did when it comes to crisis management, operational planning. That was a Tuesday afternoon for us. You know, Fortune 500 company, if something happens, that's a big deal, right? When something bad happens, and now all hands on deck, we're all reacting to it. At DEA, literally, that was, oh, that's Wednesday. I wonder what
Yeah.
tomorrow's is going to be. So you just got used to it, right? And I know it sounds arrogant. I'm not trying to be cocky about it. I'm just that's just something we were doing a lot, right? We had to think about, not only our own safety, but the public safety. If we're working with informants or even the bad guys, we can't just it's not the Wild West. We can't just go and shoot them, right? I mean, we want people to go home safe, all of us, and bad guys included. And we want them to go to jail, but we don't want them to get hurt. Um,
Yeah, and it's better if they don't start to begin with too. you know.
right, right. So yeah, absolutely. I think that was something that we did very, very, very well, and I'm proud of that. And I think that's something that is marketable and that is transferable in the civilian or afterlife, after the
Yeah.
DEA career.
Definitely. And when it comes to like institutional drug abuse, right? Like this book that we were reading about in terms of, sorry, like American cartel and the opioid crisis and doctors prescribing medications to people. Um, what can be like, is it what can be done from the DEA? Does DEA say like, listen, this is just within the like within the law, like they're allowed to do it, and that's what I could do, or are you trying to come up with plans to kind of prevent that, or were you, is that a conversation even?
It is a conversation, and it's a very delicate and political one. So I'm retired, so I can pretty much answer
Well,
anything you
yes.
ask. If you look at the current opioid crisis, it really started because of the pharmaceutical industry. Period.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
literally, if you go back, and when I train, I talk about this. I spend the first part of my presentation talking about the historical context of what happened.
Hmm.
When you look at the 1990s with Purdue
Hmm.
primarily and
Yeah.
OxyContin, what it
Yeah.
did, we changed pain management in this country. So back to your original question, we DEA and the federal government is involved in regulations, prescription. We have what we call quotas. So pharmaceutical manufacturers, they can't just say, "Hey, I have a pill here, and I'm going to make a trillion of them tomorrow." I mean,
Right.
there's so many they can do and release things like that. The problem is they constantly put pressure on their congressmen and their senators because they can financially do that, right?
I was
Because
going
a
to
lot
ask
of
about
those.
the revolving door. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And then so what do? They come to, even though we're part of the executive branch, they come to us and say, "Hey, you need to raise your quotas." And unfortunately, I've seen DEA just do it. And it's disheartening, and then at the end of the day, who gets blamed? Oh, DEA just let it happen, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, when the senator who controls your purse strings, controls your budget, is telling you to increase the
Yeah.
quotas and soften the regulations and allow these companies to do more, which they shouldn't. And then we
Yeah.
do because we pretty much have to. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And no one at DEA active will tell you that, but I'm telling you, now I'm
It's
retired.
funny.
And I love
It's
DEA. That's the reality of it.
Well, first of all, I mean, not only do I not make the association, when I think of the opioid abuse, and I think of the opioid crisis, I don't
Yeah,
blame DEA. And I don't know many people, I haven't seen that sentiment manifest in my world.
yeah.
Um,
There are people that. Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go
please, by all means. Yeah, the people that,
ahead. No, there are people that do. So let me back you up. I kind of hinted at it a little bit. So in the mid 1990s, we added a fifth vital sign in the medical community:
pain.
pain, right? And that had a profound impact,
Yeah.
because we were convinced that opioids were not non-addictive. And they would say things like less than 1% of people become
I
addicted. And
remember
we
that.
all
Yeah,
we know
sure.
now that that was all completely garbage. It was based
Like
on
cigarettes aren't addicting, right? Or they haven't found that cigarettes that cause lung damage or whatever it was.
yeah, exactly. So they were led to believe that this stuff was non-addictive. So what did we do? We literally went from prior to 1996. Let me put this in perspective. If I'm a doctor and you came to me and you said, "Hey, I'm in pain. I need some opioids." I'm going to look at you and I'm going to say, "Okay, where's the bone sticking out? Like, prove to me you're in pain." Like,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying that you couldn't game the system or trick me, because obviously that happens as well. But for the most part, statistically speaking, at least, I'm gonna look for some objective way to to
To measure
to
it.
agree and measure that you're actually in pain. You need an opioid. After 1996, that went out the door. It went out the window.
Hmm.
I mean, it literally just was thrown out the window.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, you're in pain? Oh, here's 30 pills. Here's 60 pills. So, you had your wisdom teeth taken out. You probably went home with 60 hydrocodone pills. No questions asked. Your son or daughter had a little league baseball injury. Maybe they hurt their elbow pitching or something like that. Went home with 30, 60, 90 pills. No questions asked. So
Right.
the pendulum shifted from very objective ways to measure pain to just give it to everyone.
Hmm.
So what happened? We saw this widespread abuse, and people started dying from legal opioids,
Yeah.
dying,
Yeah.
and then the number of opioids just rose, and the height was in 2012. And I think I'm right on the statistic. It was 81.3 prescriptions per 100 people in the United States. Not 100,000, not 100 million, but 100 people. So there were 81 opioid prescriptions per 100 people in the United States by
Scary.
2012.
It's one of the scariest stats I've heard in a long time.
Yeah,
It's
and then you look at
insanity.
it's insanity. It really is. And drugs like OxyContin by 2004 it was the most abused pharmaceutical on the street. In the law enforcement community, we used to call it heroin in a pill. A
That's
lot
what
of
it is,
folks were
though, chemically, right?
Yeah, and then the pill mills, all the pain management clinics that are still popped up everywhere,
All over
those
Florida.
actually started. We have a program now. It's a prescription drug monitoring program. If you and I go to the doctor right now and say we're in pain, they're going to run our names in the system, make sure we're not doctor shopping. That exists because of what was happening during this time
Correct.
period.
Yes, I read that.
So
That was in the
now,
book too.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. The book, yeah, I can't wait to read it, but it's I'm familiar with a lot of it, but so now, like I said, 2012 was the height. So now people are like, look, and then people started turning to heroin because heroin is also an opioid.
Sure.
And if they couldn't get enough from their doctor, if they didn't feel like they were getting enough from their doctor, they went to heroin. And we now know through a lot of research that about 80% of all heroin users started with legal opioid prescriptions. Let me repeat that again. Make sure that's clear.
You say 80?
Anyone who to anyone who thinks who may have said that incorrectly, up to 80% of heroin users started with legal opioid prescriptions. That's an incredible thought or statistic.
Well, I mean, I
So
don't know
then
what else would get people to take heroin. Like, I don't know what, like, to walk up
that's
to
a good
someone in the
point.
street, like, hey, man, you want to do some heroin? You're like, no, I don't think so. Like, it's not the same thing as taking a puff from a J or having a shot, but like,
Good point. And that really started a lot of them. So then a lot of folks were looking at law enforcement, specifically the DEA, saying, hey, we got to do something. So that's when we finally started to regulate the pharmaceutical industry because even by 2013, our federal government says, hey, we have a problem with prescription opioid. Like it's crazy. And we
yeah,
actually declared it an emergency within the federal government. A lot of people don't know that. It was in 2013. So we started to regulate it. So back to your original question, some people are like, shame on DEA, shame on the federal government for regulating it, because then a lot of people believe that forced people into heroin. And I would push back on that and say, actually, they were already at heroin. We saw
that's
heroin
right.
spike. We hadn't seen that type of spike since the Vietnam War. So I'm sure there was some people out there that the regulations made, getting legal opioids more difficult, and they probably did turn to heroin. But that process had already started. So I'm not trying to protect DEA.
For sure,
I love
for
it.
sure, for sure, for sure. Totally. Especially
People
when
should
you,
turn
especially
and
with that
forward.
stat to back you up with that fact that 80% of people weren't interested in heroin before they started with opioids. That means that something started somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I,
And that's, when you asked me earlier, what kind of drugs did I work? Early on, like I said, it was marijuana, cocaine, and methamphetamine. And then we started working heroin cases, and we were all kind of literally scratching our heads at the time going, and I loved it because I hadn't worked any heroin cases up to then. And I was like, what the heck's going on? Right. And now we know, now we know what was going on.
So I'm actually excited to talk to a former agent about this because I found out I found out about a month or two ago from a good buddy of mine um, that apparently just because something like cannabis is state legal does not mean that it's federally legal. And that if I was sitting on the street in California or Oregon or New York or Illinois and I was smoking a J and a Fed could hypothetically, and I heard they're not going to bother because it's such a pain in the butt to deal with, but could hypothetically come over and arrest me for that. Is that the case?
Yeah, so marijuana is a Schedule One drug under the federal gov- federal
Yeah.
government's statutes, and
Yes.
so it's illegal.
So how can
But
the
some
states make it legal?
well, that's a whole state rights versus federal rights. I can tell you why I don't like marijuana though.
Sure, let's hear it. I'd love to hear it.
THC levels. So a lot of
Yes.
folks, marijuana, the THC in marijuana, THC is the psychoactive substance. That what makes you high.
Yeah.
That is what makes you high.
Yeah.
And the THC levels, I went to high school in the 1980s. The THC level in the 1980s was about 2% on the high end.
Really?
You know, in the 1990s, oh yeah, 1990s, 2 to 4%. You know, by the early 2000s, 4, 5, 6%. And then you see this increase to where they are now. The average THC levels in marijuana now about 25, 30%.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I hear people, especially parents who will tell me all the time, it's just weed. I hear that a lot. Just weed, quote unquote. You know, I smoked it when I was in high school. What's wrong with my son or daughter smoking it? And I have to correct them
What's
and
going to give them
say,
short-term memory loss? That's why.
well, true too. There's a lot of problems associated with it. But the end of the day, it's not the same weed. If,
Mhm.
if if you could go into a time machine and grab the marijuana from the 70s and 80s and maybe even the 90s, okay, then it is just weed.
Yeah.
You know, but the marijuana that especially young people are smoking now is not even in the same ballpark. I mean, it
Mhm.
literally is not. They ought to call it something else because it's not the same thing it was 10, 15 years ago. I mean, it's if you smoke one marijuana cigarette right now, that's like smoking 12, 13 marijuana joints 15 years ago. I
Yeah.
mean, it's literally that ratio.
Yeah.
So what are we seeing now? All the things that was supposed to, the stress, the anxiety, all, the sleeping, all that stuff. We're actually seeing those things increase, especially in young people.
Hmm.
It's a trigger for psychosis. We know that. Uh, it, and then I talked to, because of my work with Only 2MG, I talked to a lot of folks in the treatment and recovery community. And, the biggest client that they work with, young people in marijuana. They call it cannabis, same thing, marijuana.
Yeah.
Cannabis use disorder, which is marijuana addiction.
Yeah.
Do they work with meth and coke and other stuff? Yeah, absolutely. But marijuana, young people, number one client. Isn't that
I believe
incredible?
it.
And that's across the United States.
I believe that. I believe that. The reason why I believe that it could potentially be so dangerous is because of the no big deal attitude about it. There are things that have big deal attitudes about it that kind of already, like, again, you tell me, like, I was never in my life interested in like an upper, like opioids or coke or anything like that. Like if you told me like, no, man, like I want to leave that stuff alone, and like it's scary. It scares the heck out of me, And even when I was younger, when I was in high school, I remember I used to be deathly terrified of cannabis because I had friends that were in high school that were cool, and and all these girls would love them, and they were good at sports, and then they'd start smoking, and all. And next thing you know, like all they're interested in doing, is smoking, and I was like, no, I can't do this. That
Yeah.
scares the heck out of me. And then it became a lot more just like it almost became like drinking, like casual, like as casual as drinking, and probably even I'm sure and we're seeing a downswing in alcohol consumption. I'm sure there's a direct correlation between how many more people are smoking are smoking weed now as opposed to people that are not drinking.
Yeah, we're actually seeing a downturn in both
Oh yeah,
young people. Yeah, which
really?
is one. I don't know if you ever look at monitoring the future study is a long-term research that's been going on at University of Michigan. I mean, they've probably been doing it for 25, 30 years, and every year they really dive into drugs and alcohol
Mm-hmm.
by young people, and their highlight is eighth grade, 10th grade, and high school seniors. And we actually are at historic lows right now, even when you throw in marijuana. So, which is good. So we actually are seeing a decrease in both, even smoking, which is wonderful as well.
Yeah,
We're seeing an increase in things like vaping and
that stresses me out too, but I can't do much about that, unfortunately. I think a lot of this stuff just comes down to education and these kind of conversations.
I agree 100%. That's one of the reasons why I do what I do is education. And I know it's maybe cliche to say, but information is power.
Yeah.
And I really believe that. And there's also, you have to take that information and apply it in your apply it in your life to
Yeah,
make it
that's the
happen.
hard part.
Right? That's the hard part. Exactly. So those are the tools and the things that we need to be encouraging in young people. So they have the information. Now how are we going to make it applicable in your life? How are we going to execute this
Yeah,
plan? Right.
yeah. So let's oh, sorry. The last thing before we get to Springfield teaching and all that fun stuff, because I'm excited to talk to you about that too. Um, I mean, China is clearly behind the fentanyl crisis, as far as we know, right? Is this this
Yeah.
is does the government or does the DA look at this like an act of war? Is this is this soft war? Is it because again, like I forgot this. I thought the stat was that more people had died from fentanyl overdose than like all 25 years of the Middle East war. Like more troops have died in the Middle East. For the last 25 years, or maybe even since Vietnam. I don't remember what the exact stat was. Is that what it was?
Yeah, I know Vietnam is one of the ones I've seen for sure, and that's true. I mean, like I said, if you look at the 2023, 107,543 people died, and
Yeah.
75,000 because of one drug, fentanyl. And then, like I said, 2024 data is not complete yet, but we think it's going to be about 80, 82,000. And again, if you dive deeper into those numbers, I guarantee you it's going to be about 75% because of fentanyl. So fentanyl, the chemicals to make fentanyl come from China.
Right.
Now there, India, there's some European countries as well, but China by far number one,
Hmm.
absolutely controls the chemical trade,
Yeah.
and they sell the majority of that to the cartels.
Right.
I mean, they'll sell it to anyone. You and I can go online right now and buy that stuff, but their number one customer is the cartels, and within the cartels, it's usually the Sinaloa cartel or the
Hmm.
CJ&G cartel, Jalisco New Generation, and they'll take the chemicals, they'll put them on the cargo ships, they get uh, transported to Mexico, right into the ports, which unfortunately the cartels control. A lot of
Hmm.
corruption, a lot of,
Sure.
just a lot of control. And then from there, they'll get trucked or transported to various locations throughout Mexico. And this is, by the way, not only for fentanyl, but for methamphetamine as well. The drugs are mass produced and then they're smuggled into the United States. So yeah, do I consider this war? Absolutely, it is.
It
China's
feels
been
like it, right? It has to be.
it really does, and it's interesting if you look at China's history, and China's culture with drugs. I actually talk about this when I talk about the opioid crisis, and I kind of give people the historical context. Back in the 1700s, England was the first country that was really selling like raw opium to China, and they would
Wow.
trade it for porcelain, silk, and tea, and it had a profound impact on China overnight. In fact, it's estimated that over the course of the next 100 years, 1 in 4 males, that's 25% of the male population, had developed an addiction to opium. And then what was happening with China as they were growing, because they weren't a superpower back then, right?
Yeah.
They were immigrating to places like the United States, especially on the California on the West Coast. And what were they bringing with them? They were bringing their opium, So
Wow.
it's an,
So it started in the
it,
1700s.
yeah, and then I don't know if you knew this, but China actually went to war twice over opium.
I did not know that.
1839. Yeah, 1839 was called the First Opium War, and I'm sure there's another official name for it as well, but
Sure.
it's called the First Opium War, and they literally went to war with England over opium, and
Wow.
they weren't a superpower.
And
England
they said
was.
you just can't sell us this anymore. That's what they were
Yeah,
saying.
they internally within I think it was the Jing dynasty said, hey, this is bad. This is hurting our people.
Hmm.
Stop. And of course, England's like, no, 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 no. This is a big, like in today's economy, this would be like $1 billion
Business.
business,
Yeah.
right? This be like telling Amazon you can't ship anymore, right? This is
Hmm.
this is a huge deal. So two nations went to war with this, and China lost because they weren't a superpower. So they
Right.
had to sign these very unfavorable treaties, and and then fast forward to 1855, 1856 time period. They went to war a second time, and this time it was against France and England. They teamed up against China, and still China wasn't a superpower. And again, they lost, and they had signed these unfavorable treaties. So to me, it's interesting that you literally have, and this didn't stop until about 1910. So you have a couple hundred years of history within China of drugs just devastating this country. And
Yeah.
then if you read about Chinese culture and talk to people, it's fascinating because I mean now it's send as much of this poison to the West as you can and
Hmm.
destroy them with it, right?
Yeah.
And I absolutely think it is. It's a form of a warfare, and I don't I don't think the DEA looks at it like that. I think that's pretty
They do
harsh
not.
words, right? I don't think so. I mean I'm
How can you
sure
not
they
with those
know.
numbers? I mean, if I mean,
I
you know,
mean
if
officially, yeah.
what?
I mean officially. You
Yes.
and me,
Yeah.
absolutely, like you said, the numbers make sense, right? But officially, that can't be a stance that that our government's going to put out there. But they are working behind the scenes. I can assure you that to further regulate this and to stop the flow of these chemicals.
I hope I certainly hope so. I certainly hope so. It's crazy, and you know, and it's so interesting because you always hear about how big picture China is. You always hear about how they're always willing to play the long game, and that's really what an enormous amount of their advantage is. You know, like there's one president in that they feel like they can't work with, they'll just wait 4 years or 8 years at most. But Xi Jinping's not going anywhere for for a while, and so
Right.
so he can afford to wait it out. So I feel like it's so fascinating to see like this country got devastated, kept that long picture in mind, and said, "Hey, we just, this just happened to us. Let's do it. This could be a
Payback.
great form of warfare." Yeah, this is
Yeah.
that's crazy. It's really really interesting. Um, Great. So Springfield, Missouri, Springfield, Missouri, where you are now, right?
Yeah. So, well, after I left, so Texas was my first supervisor job, and then I went to Quantico, Virginia next.
Okay.
So Quantico, Virginia is we're actually housed on the Marine Corps base, and you have the FBI Academy, and you have the DEA Academy. So I was there for about 4 years, and I was in
Teaching,
charge of most. What's that?
teaching.
A little, yeah, teaching. I was in management, so I
Okay.
ran I ran a couple training units, but I did teach as often as I could. I had the opportunity definitely to teach more, and I took advantage of it, and I loved it. Absolutely
Hmm.
loved it. I was in charge of most in-service training. So once you graduated from our academy and you got assigned to, let's say, South Florida, and you needed additional training and whatever, you would come back to Quantico for, whether it was conspiracy training, whether it was leadership training, whether it was,
Cool.
whatever it is. And my unit handled 95% of that at the academy. And then I actually got to start the leadership and training development unit for DEA at our academy. And so
Cool.
now we were developing, yeah, which was awesome. We
How'd
were
that happen?
developing. Well, it's funny. I get there, right, and I didn't. I was replacing someone. I was replacing someone that actually promoted, so there was a vacancy. So I
Mhm.
get in this spot. And I'm like, all right, what's my job? And I look at this list of classes that we put on, and it's a pretty large list. And like I said, it's most in-service training, with the exception of like firearms or medical or tactical. If it has anything academic, it's probably going to be my unit.
Cool.
Well, on this list, there's a bunch of leadership stuff. So I'm like, oh my goodness, this is exactly what I want to do. And I'm like, I'm sure glad they didn't know that, because they never put the right people in the right jobs. It's just a vacancy. It
Serendipity.
literally was an accident, right? It
Yeah.
was the position was open. So I go, oh my goodness. And then I realized that I mean, we have if you, all the, if you look at the chemists and the analysts and the support staff, and you look at DEA as a whole, it's probably, I don't know, 9,000 people. And our leadership program is supposed to support all of them. And I thought, why are we doing this in conjunction with all these other classes? Very important other classes.
Yeah.
But I made the argument that we need to remove those and have our own leadership and development training unit.
Cool.
And thankfully, I had the ear of my management, and they were all wonderful people. And they made a decision to, yes, we could do that. And then this is the kicker, though. I had to run my own old team, and I had to run the new team, and then there was another team in the building that I ended up getting. So I had three teams that I was running, and they didn't change that until I left. When I left, they finally put supervisors over each team.
So
I
they
guess
gave
with
you an
the
enormous amount of
confidence.
work.
What's that?
So it's an enormous amount of work, you're saying.
Oh yeah, but I loved every bit of it. I had amazing, amazing, amazing people who worked with me, who I got to work for, who I got to serve, as
Yeah.
their boss.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I got to teach and train, and that really, I've always had that interest, but that really just kind of ignited. So
How
then
much
in
more
2020,
bureaucrat? Oh, sorry. Please go ahead.
no, no, please, no, no, go ahead.
How much more bureaucratic is the management side than the agent side? Like, do things move a lot more slowly when you're in management because you got to get approvals and you got to go through all these channels, or
Yeah, it certainly can, depending on what we're doing, but you can get things to flow pretty good. So, I mean, obviously you're handling some of the scheduling, some of the, I mean, even some of the things like supplies, right?
Mhm.
Let's say your computer breaks down. I need to get you a new computer, right? I mean, so you're handling all the administrative tasks, but more importantly, you're helping. Hopefully, you're mentoring and developing people. Let's say you're brand new and you don't have that experience and vision yet, right? And maybe you can utilize some of mine, and I can help you get on that path, give you that directive, to that push. This is what you're going to write about, like you were saying earlier, right? I love that. Sometimes, depending on the direction of the investigation, things sometimes would slow down, depending on
Mhm.
how depending on what the investigator wanted to do.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it wasn't a. I mean, the red tape's there, the bureaucracy's there, but if you let that bother you, then you're never going to be effective. You just have to learn how to manage it and deal with it, and you know, make it part of your workflow.
Yeah, yeah. When I started, when I was doing sales, both myself and my dad are terrible at the red tape stuff and, bureaucratic stuff. Terrible,
Yeah,
terrible, terrible at it. Which is why we have
yeah.
a small business instead of working for a corporation or something like that, right? But and my dad and I got an email from I forgot where it was, either Columbia or Harvard or one of these universities looking for some medical equipment for their research. And they said, okay, but we need you to onboard, and they sent me a pack of like documents to fill out. And my dad and
Oh,
I look at each other and we're like, and my dad is like, I can't tell you how many deals I've lost because because of how many times that I've needed to do this and I just can't get myself to do the paperwork. Can you try to deal with it?
oh,
And
wow.
and I looked at it and I'm like, I don't know. And then I'm like, wait a minute. All this is asking for is my email address, my phone number, and my W-9, my W-9, like five different
Yeah,
times. I was like, this is easy. I could
yeah,
do this. And then next thing I know, I'm doing all these forms for all these different universities. I know exactly how to onboard, no problem. So I guess, like, what you're saying, if you let that bog you down, it stops you. But if you can figure out the way to navigate it, like that famous Incredible scene where the at the insurance company where the guy goes, he's there, you're teaching them how to penetrate the bureaucracy. You're teaching the people how to how to move their way
yeah,
through it.
yeah.
So yeah, so the teaching, the curriculum. What's it? So is it a classroom setting? Is it field work? Is it embodied? What's it like?
It's great. It's we have several classrooms at Quantico. We have an academy. We have a
And it's
training
like
academy.
tests, class, homework, slides, stuff like that.
Well, for the in-service training, not so much the tests. A lot of PowerPoints, handouts. A lot of facilitated, especially for the leadership. A lot of facilitated discussion, which is what I prefer. I love to talk. I don't want to
Hmm.
just like when I'm talking about fentanyl, I have to go up in front of the class and show a lot of slides and kind of lead the class, right? But
Yeah.
leadership is, to me, we're learning from each other, the different perspectives in the room. So it's a little of everything. If you're training the new cadets, new agents, then obviously you have to test them on that knowledge and make sure that they're that they're comprehending it and can pass and go on to the next stage. But for my units, when we're looking at in service, it's more just uh, enhancing their learning or
Okay.
maybe introducing new principles.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of fun. I can tell you, I loved every second while I was at Quantico. I really, really did. It was first of all, I had some really good bosses. I was very thankful. All my bosses were really, really good guys.
What was it like being back
And
in Virginia for the first time in 20 years?
yeah, that was actually fun too. This traffic sucks, but
Yeah.
thankfully I lived very close to Quantico, so my commute was 15 minutes a day. Every so often I had to go to Washington D.C. for a meeting at our headquarters there, and in D.C. we're actually on the Virginia side, right across the street from the Pentagon. If you look at the Pentagon City Mall where the Macy's is,
Hmm.
right across the street from Macy's, you'll see two large black buildings that are really, really tall, and that's DEA headquarters. And I enjoyed going there because sometimes I would see friends that that I'd worked with over the years, and they would be stationed there. but I didn't enjoy driving there.
Yes,
You know what
I
I mean?
believe that. I
The,
believe that.
the traffic in Northern Virginia is horrific, and so I was so excited originally when I went back, and I was like, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and then before long, I'm like, it's going to take me an hour to go 10 miles. I
Yeah.
have no interest in leaving my house right now, right?
Hmm. Definitely.
You make the right.
Gotcha. But yeah. I found that too, by the way. Even where I grew up, I mean, these places get so jam packed, and I went back and I'm like, it used to take me 10 minutes to go to the supermarket. Now it takes me half an hour. It's crazy. But but
Yeah.
we I used to do a lot of deliveries, especially when I was single, and I wanted to travel and get to see more towns and cities. So let's say I'd have 5 customers that bought ultrasound machines from me along the East Coast, right, in the Carolinas and Virginia and Florida, right, or whatever it was. And I would so I'd load up a company van with a bunch of machines, and I'd drive down and stop in each place and maybe spend a day in each city, and we charge each customer whatever amount for a freight cost. But we like, but if we get enough people, if you get enough customers, we'll load up our own van. I'll deliver it myself, door to door service for you. And we always knew you got to get to DC. You got to be at DC at 4 o'clock in the morning, because otherwise you could spend 5 hours in traffic sitting, just getting past that stretch. It was horrendous.
Even when I go, I'll be there next week. You have the HOV or the express lanes, is what they call them now, the
Yeah.
road, the lanes in the middle, and they do it based on
How many
how
people you have in the
busy the
car,
road.
right? Oh, is that what it
No, it's
is?
not based on how busy the road is. So the price fluctuates. So they try
Yes.
to guarantee you the speed limit. So in order to guarantee the speed limit, they have to raise the price to get more cars off the road. So there have been times when I've been on that stretch and it's cost me 60, $70 to go,
No
not very many
way.
miles. Yeah, just but again, I'm driving the speed limit,
Yeah.
so I'm not sitting in, you look, and I've taken pictures, I'm looking at the traffic and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, these folks are sitting in traffic for 2.5, 3 hours to go 20 miles. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And people just won't pay the money. And I'm like, I'm going to find a way to pay the money.
I was
I'm going to
I
do
was
it.
almost certain after COVID that this would not be like during COVID that this would not be a thing anymore, because I was like, once people realize that they don't have to put up with this, they're not going to
Yeah.
anymore. But I'm
Well,
surprised.
you're right. No, you're right. And I think well, COVID for sure slowed it down. That was really weird. If you ever gotten, if you live in the DC area, or I'm sure New York or any big area at the
Yeah.
time, and you're like, where are all the people? Like, it was just an eerie feeling, right?
Hmm.
And then a lot of people realized that, hey, they could remote work. They could,
Yeah.
work from home. And
They,
then
and,
the
they, and they
federal
could live
government.
anywhere, meaning you
Yes.
could keep your job with Bank of America and not be in Manhattan every day. You could work for Bank of America and live in Monticello, New York, an hour and a half north, and be like, yeah, as happy,
Yeah.
and live on a farm, and you can have the best life that in the world if you wanted.
Well, within the federal government, they made a decision over the last couple of years that
You
remote
have to go back
working
to,
wasn't.
yeah. What do you
Yeah.
think about
So,
that?
so I have mixed feelings. For the most part, I think it's silly, but I think there are people that do need to be in work. But ultimately, I think for away from the policy, I actually like being in the office
Right.
because I like having face to face contact. I
Yeah.
like, the relationship building and things like that. I think you lose some context when you're over the computers. But again, I think it's convenient. I think it's nice to be able to live wherever you want to live. And we have airports, right? We can fly if we need to be in the same room.
Sure.
So I have some mixed feelings. If your motivation is, well, we have a lot of lazy employees. If we let them stay at home, they're not going to do anything. Well, then to me, that's a problem with management. Are you not tasking these people? Are you not
Oh,
checking on these
interesting.
people in a sensible way? Are you not trusting your people to get the work done? And if they are getting the work done and they are good employees, then what's the harm of them sitting in front of their computer wearing pajamas?
Right. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I think there's a lack of, and I've seen this not just in the federal government, but in a lot of industries, where I work, when I do a lot of leadership training, there's just a lack of, there is no leadership. It's just management.
Yeah. I've noticed that too, actually. It's funny that you put it like that, and it's true, because I feel like there's a lot of jobs that, I lived in Manhattan for a little while, and everyone there works for these companies, and like these jobs, that I'm like, so what's your job? And they try to explain it to me, and I'm like, it doesn't sound like that needs to be like a full-time position that you need to be doing all the time, you know? And like they're like, well, they're like, I'll be honest, I don't. Like I work, you know, I actually only have like 4 hours of work a day. Like, I have to be logged onto my computer and be available, but like I only have a couple hours of work a day, you know? And so I hear I don't know if that's management, if that's the direction that the world, again, with AI and stuff like that, that's the direction that the world is heading, that a lot more you just kind of need people more for oversight than actual tasks and actual, you know, kind of work like that. But I think that and this also will certainly have a direct correlation to drug abuse in the future. People, when people don't know what they're going to do with themselves, and you know, and you, let's say you are an adult and you're, or even a young adult, if you're 24 years old and you're out of college and you're getting paid $150,000 a year and your job requires you to be working 3 hours a day. I mean, who's not going to drink a beer in the afternoon, and who's not going to sit and smoke a J in the afternoon unless you're extremely motivated to build something yourself and do your own thing? You know, I mean, the question of what humans are going to do with themselves is a legitimate question.
Well, and to further that, now when we don't have the human interaction, I mean, we know historically what that's. I mean, there was a, gosh, I'm going to talk about a study. I don't know all the names, but back in the early '70s, there was a study. There was a psychologist, and oh gosh, I forget his name now, but you can look this up. And you ever heard of the rat park study?
No.
Okay, so he puts a bunch of rats together in this, I don't know, thing that he makes, right?
Okay.
And it's got the little wheels the rats can run on, and
Hmm.
and they can have sex. They can do whatever they want to do. I mean, it's called Rat Park. It's
Hmm.
just in this Rat Park they have two bottles. One has, I think it was cocaine, and the other one has water.
Oh, I think I heard of this.
So
Okay.
they would go to the cocaine. You heard of this one? It's interesting. They would go to
Yeah.
the cocaine and they would drink from it, but then it was just a little bit. But the water they would drink all the time, right? But they'd have all this fun interactivity, and then they isolated them. Now they had just one rat, same two bottles, but
Hmm.
no other rats around,
Yeah.
none.
Yeah.
Literally the opposite. They would look at the water and they might drink it, and then they immediately go to the cocaine, and they just every single time. And it was
Yes.
talking about this social isolation. And to me, I agree, what are you going to do with your time? But then to me, the social isolation of not being around people. And I
Yes.
know we can get it online. I get it. But I
It's
think
not
it's
the
so
same
much
thing.
more
It's not the
important.
same
It's
thing.
not the
I
same
think
thing.
study after
And
study emphasizes that, you know?
absolutely. And we're already seeing that with social media, right? And look how the people treat people on social media now. I mean, it's so easy to say, oh, I don't like your politics, or I don't like your stance on this. Well, then you're an a-hole, or
Yeah.
you're blah blah blah, and we're so nasty to each other, and that's because you would never say these things face to face,
Hmm.
ever, you
Yeah.
know, but online. And then the more that we encourage that, the more that we encourage a lack of face to face, a lack of social and relationship skills and communication, the more I think we're going to see people turn to
Yeah.
drugs and alcohol and
Definitely.
destructive behavior, and that scares the what out of me, especially with young people.
Yeah, so the school I teach at is an Orthodox Jewish school in North Miami Beach, and these kids one of the aspects of the school is that the school is very strict about no phones in school, no smartphones, no social media at home, even at home, and I remember I didn't want to teach high school because I thought they were too immature. I thought I wasn't able to, I wouldn't be able to explain and have, creative or deep or philosophical conversations. And these kids just don't get it. And these kids in particular, there's so much face-to-face interaction. There's so much confidence from, like when you're with your friends, you don't sit on your phone and go on Instagram or go on Twitter. You got to play basketball. You got to find something to do in your parents. You got to drive your parents crazy. You got to make something in the kitchen. You got to do something. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
I agree.
And I walked away after a week of of trying out, and I'm like, I love this. I absolutely love it. And they all have flip phones, and they, and sometimes they'll get, these, smartphones, but with all these blocks on it. And, and it's just absolutely incredible how sophisticated and creative and confident, relative to, my own siblings, even that I have a 14-year-old brother. that is, I mean, he has a phone, and my mom only gives him, I think, 2 or 3 hours of screen time a day, but that's still a lot. It still makes a difference. Yeah, it's
I agree.
it's it's really fascinating. I hope that this becomes a trend. I really think, I hope, and I think that we're going to look at this, like this 20 years or 15-year gap of social media, and as like the guinea pigs of society, and be like, I can't believe we let our families just do that. I can't believe we let our kids do that.
I hope you're right, but now throw on the AI that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah,
What is that doing? It's people aren't thinking, they're not writing, they're not there's this decision making. I mean, they're letting a computer do it for you. So no, I agree. I hope that we do look at this and say this is silly. And you are seeing, like you said, I mean, there's a great example. I mean, a school that's saying, hey, we got to restrict this,
yeah,
for the mental health of our, and for the development of our
sure.
students, right? And I'd love to see more and more school districts and just parents in general take that
Yeah, it's
on.
becoming a little bit more of a conversation. Jonathan Haidt, I don't know if you heard about him. He
Oh,
made those rounds.
amazing guy. Yeah,
Incredible,
yeah.
incredible. And
I
his book,
follow
The
him
Ancient
on LinkedIn.
Generation. Did you read the book?
Yeah.
I
No, it's on my queue. I
Yeah,
have a million books in queue, but I actually follow him on LinkedIn. I watch some of his videos all the time, and
yeah,
brilliant. And what he's saying makes sense. And I just wish it would catch on. I've heard parents really push back. Not to him, well, to what he's basically saying, but like when I have these conversations in my training, they're like, "Oh, our kids need phones, and what if I need to get a hold of them? Well, what did we do when we were young, right? We didn't
yeah,
have the phones. I mean, it's
yeah.
like they lose sight of reality. And yeah,
That
no, I
book,
know who you're talking about.
that book might be the most important book I think I've ever read. One of the most important books I've ever read in my life. Just
Wow, I'm
because.
gonna, I'm gonna have to move it up to my
Yeah,
top
it's
then.
so, because the implications and just the way that he lays it out is so profound and so clear and so devastating, quite frankly, and like you're like, how can you even, like, the stories of these 11, 12-year-old girls with these, with these food disorders, and and depression, and anorexia, God forbid, and you're like, what is happening, and unfortunately, fortunately, rather, you have voices like him that make the rounds. And fortunately, what's so cool, I think, is, like, how the podcast, he goes on Lex Friedman, Joe Rogan, and Diary of a CEO, and he reaches 100 million people like that. And you're like, that's incredible. Like, that's incredible. You can't do that on Fox News anymore. You can't do that on MSNBC or CNN anymore. So, I kind of hope that the conversation out there is going to be, is really is turning. I really hope so. What are some passions of yours outside of drug enforcement?
I think my biggest one right now is traveling. I love, 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 love to travel.
Okay,
6 states here in July coming up.
where are you going?
I don't know, everything about it. I love, where am I going? Well, I'm kind of cheating here because when I go to DC, that's really 3 states, right? You get, well,
Yeah,
2.5 states. DC, not a state, right? You
sure.
get Virginia and Maryland, so that's
Yeah,
kind of but this month I have Nebraska, Maine, Virginia, Maryland,
beautiful.
and Florida. Yeah,
I've
northern Florida, not here.
I moved from New York to Seattle, and I did that, right, and I drove it. I drove there and back.
Oh,
Um,
that's
I
miserable.
well, you know what? The first half
Too
and the
far.
last half
Yeah,
were both miserable, depending where you're coming from. So New York
yeah,
to Washington. Once I got to Denver. So the first day from New York to Chicago was beautiful because you got,
yeah.
Pennsylvania, you got the hills, you got all the nature. Then you got the plainlands. You got like the flat. You got just the flat Illinois, Iowa, whatever. And even the first part of Colorado, people don't associate, is all like, the eastern part of Colorado is all
Kansas.
fields. Yeah, and
Yeah,
then you get to the mountains, and you get to like Denver area, and then west of there is just. It made me fall
beautiful.
in love with the
Yeah,
country in a way that I've never experienced before. And
yeah,
it was incredible. I think the Pacific Northwest is some of the most beautiful natural scenery, I think, on the planet.
yeah.
Yeah. Have you been there?
I agree. We have, yeah, absolutely. I have, and it's a beautiful country, isn't it? It's
America is such an
It's
amazing, such an incredible place. It's
it
I
is.
took it for granted for so many years until I had a family, and then once I had kids, um, you know, I started getting emotional at the national anthem at like sports games. And I'm like, what's going on over here? I'm like, I'm tearing up and I'm crying. I'm like thinking about the hope for like and everything that this place represents and everything in it. And I'm like, I just I love this place. It's really amazing.
I absolutely agree. To this day I get goosebumps hearing it. I mean, it means it's special, and as much as I love traveling around the world, I always come back here, and it just feels good. And
What's your favorite country
that's probably my
outside
biggest
of the
passion right
States?
now.
What was your favorite
Well,
country to
I'm
visit?
I'm well, I'm partial to Germany because my mother's German, and I was
Cool,
actually born in Germany, military
cool.
base, but I was born in Germany, and I speak a little bit of German, so I'm partial to Germany. But everywhere I go, I love Europe. I love the history in Europe. I love when you look at a church and you're looking at it going, "Oh my goodness, that's been there since 1400."
Hmm.
like and people are just walking around like it's just mind blowing, right? And um, but ultimately, I mean, it there's beautiful places in the United States, from the mountains to just the small towns, and it's just a gorgeous place to travel, and very
Yeah,
fortunate that I can
yeah.
travel.
Europe. I was just in Barcelona and that enormous church there. I've never been uh I've never been speechless as a result of a building. But the
Yeah.
church blew me away. I forgot what it was called. Do you know
That's
what I'm
awesome.
talking about? That giant, that enormous one in
No,
Barcelona.
it doesn't surprise me. Barcelona's, it doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
But
I
but
feel
I
like
I feel
Europe
you
has
though.
that history. America has like that life and that spirit that like there's just like it's the younger brother of the entire world. I feel like that cool, enthusiastic younger brother that's just like figuring itself out, in a beautiful
I
way.
go hike with some guys, and we were in Arizona. We were at his. We went to both Bryce and Zion, and both beautiful. I remember when we
Hmm.
first drove in. It was four of us in the car, all adult males, right? And we're all. I mean, it was literally probably the same if it were 15, 20 years ago, and we were all 13-year-old females meeting Justin Bieber for the first time. Like we were all like ah, like it was so. I mean, it was just breathtaking.
Yeah,
You had no words. It was absolutely incredible, and I love that. But yeah, and then of course, then when you put it in perspective, and you're like, and you're in Barcelona, or you're somewhere else, and you're like, gosh, this thing has been here for 500 years. Think of the things, the conversations, the people that have walked through here. I don't know. I love that deep thinking, and
yeah.
thinking of the impact these places have had. I mean, it's just incredible.
Yeah, I was just in Israel right before the whole thing with Iran popped off. I had a very close friend of mine that got married there, and I went to that Western Wall, and I was there, and I was like, this is a spot. And I was just thinking, I was just sitting there, and I'm like, this is a spot that 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 millions and millions of people,
Yeah,
from every religion in the world, from everywhere all over the world,
yeah,
just come and pray. And I'm like, there's so much
yep,
significant, like it's just a spot of prayer and love and hope. And I'm like, and you just soak in it, and
yep.
you're like, this is just, like, it's so beautiful. And
Profound, right?
it's so profound, and I think I hope America will get something like that. I really do. I hope that we get some, like, because I think that what we need to be grounded a little bit more is like something spiritual and something. Um, we have an amazing national spirit. We have a beautiful sense of patriotism, Americans. And like it's always been the case. But do we have a location that like is like the manifestation of all those hopes and dreams? I mean, I think that it would be a beautiful, beautiful, magnificent thing to like. That would be like a huge cultural thing for the country to have a physical manifestation of a place that people can like connect to.
No, I agree. I tell you, the first time I ever saw the Statue of Liberty,
Yes, maybe
it
that's
was.
it.
I didn't cry, but it was pretty amazing. I mean, I felt that warm, those goosebumps, and thought,
Sure.
man, think of all these folks who've come to this country following this amazing dream, right?
Yeah.
And what other country in the world has just opened their arms to, it's just, I don't know. I thought that was, but you're right. I don't know that we ever will have that place like you
You got
described,
to
but
build it. You got to
you know,
build it, and they will come.
that's why we have
We'll see.
baseball, right?
That's right. Right.
Cornfields.
Right. Right. Definitely, definitely, definitely. Brian, I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much for getting back to me so quickly, working with me so quickly, taking the time to record this. This is so much fun, and your service and all that you've done, and your teaching and your work on the ground, really, really means the world to me, and means the world, I'm sure, to everyone that's going to listen to this. And and I didn't even get to talk to you about Eagle Six, but maybe that'll be for another time. uh, um,
Thank you. This was
This is really,
awesome
really
conversation.
delightful. Brian, thank you
Thanks for
so much.
explaining.
Thanks for the time. I hope to be in touch. Okay. Thank you so much. Have a great day, man. Happy 4th of July.
You as well.
All right. Take care.
Happy
Bye
4th
bye.
of July.
Bye bye.